What I feel we overemphasize a lot and perhaps underexplain in the interview is great communication skills. There is that one section of candidates that think that being an over smart response responder to an interview question would cut it. No, it doesn't. You are being asked questions, but it's not just the direct answer that is being looked at, but also what is being said between the lines, what your body language is saying, what you are saying, and how you are saying starts to matter much more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Weekday Show. I'm your host, Amit Singh, founder and CEO of Weekday, a hiring marketplace where job seekers can 8x their chances of finding their perfect job, and recruiters can supercharge their productivity by accessing the largest database of talent in the country. We have 80% of white collar workforce of India on our platform. Check out Weekday at weekday.works. Happy to present to you the Weekday Show, where recruitment leaders share actionable insights and answer the most common hiring FAQs, and explore the hiring process from both sides, and dissect real life interview scenarios. Our guest for today is Kaushiki Srivastava, who is the HR director at Ubisoft, which is one of the largest gaming studios in the world, and has a pretty sizable presence in India as well. Prior to Ubisoft, she was at Sony Music, which I'm pretty sure was a very interesting stint. And prior to that, she was at Pernod Ricard, which is a liquor holding company, brands like Jacob's Creek, Absolute Vodka, that everybody would have heard of. Prior to that, she was at Allied Blenders and Distillers, which actually IPO'd just this week, mainly known for their Officer's Choice whiskey. So, very varied experiences in different domains, which almost like everyone, I think, would be interested in. And we'll talk a lot more about it in the due course of this podcast. Welcome, Kaushiki. Welcome to the Weekday Show.
Thank you so much, Amit. Very happy to be here.
Same here, same here. So, Kaushiki, we'll basically do three major segments in today's episode. The first one is rapid fire questions. We'll talk about fun and fast questions about hiring. The
Mhm.
second one would be a deep dive where we'll talk more about your journey and why you took certain decisions, or like what led you to sort of where you are. And the third one is hire or pass, where we analyze real life interview scenarios uh, and talk about whether it is a hire or a pass. So
All
let's
right.
start with the rapid fire.
Sure.
All right. So the first one is, what's the most creative way a candidate has ever tried to stand out from the crowd?
Wow, there's a lot. If I really go back to all the kind of candidates I would have interviewed, I'm sure I've probably interviewed more than 1,000 by now. I think I particularly remember a candidate very crisply kind of dressed and showing up for work. We were hiring in a more casual environment, and of course, we're all taught and brought up to think that we have to show up in a certain way, and that's the correct template to show up. And I think. Of course, the person's efforts to show up really mattered, and the that's it's always great. But what stood out to me was the which really didn't stand out in the most positive way was the overusage of jargons and very fancy English, and kind of going into a space where you were not comprehending what he was trying to say, but he was just saying a lot of things, in very, very complicated language, I would
But
say.
was it like a, sort of learned thing, or were they like making stuff at the
I
time?
think
Like,
I
were they
think
working with templates?
unfortunately, it was not easy to comprehend whether the person was just using dictionary words to explain something that they really knew. And that was a moment where honestly I really had to kind of tell them that why don't we just simplify this and let's talk in like a more layman's language. Nobody needs to impress each other with the English here. So I think that I really give credit to the person who stood out, who really tried really hard to kind of stand out from the crowd, but part of it was okay, part of it was too much.
But did that person end up getting hired? No.
I did end up recommending a few trainings to the person to work better. In fact, it's candidates like these that really motivated me to get into coaching and work with a lot of aspirants, because I feel like you need help. and we don't have that gap bridged between candidates and the corporate world. So people just think of some of the checklist items to do the right things and show up, but I think they need help, and I think
And
that motivated.
the thing is that there's a lot of misleading information out there as well. And this is one of the reasons why we are doing this series as well.
Yeah, yeah, and
All right. Yeah.
it's been. I'm happy to see that the person's reached places now. It's been a while, so we're still connected on LinkedIn, and I genuinely offered my help to say I'd really like to help you, but unfortunately not in this role.
All right. Moving on, the next one. What's the most useless skill listed on a resume that you have ever seen?
No skill is useless, Amit. I would say. I think what I may want to tweak my response to would be I don't consider any skill useless. In fact, I feel like you learn so much from things that you feel that maybe you're not learning from. But actually, in retrospect, when you look back, and you must retrospect actually, that you learn a lot from what you may not have even paid attention to. So honestly, there's no useless skill. But what I feel we overemphasize a lot and perhaps under-explain in the interview is great communication skills. I go back to that because, again, when my previous example, I think, these are JDs always speak of excellent communication skills, but we don't really emphasize on what do you mean by that. Do I want English proficiency? Do I want someone who's good at presentation? Do I want relationship building through interpersonal? Do I want, excellent, just being able to express their thoughts and ideas and concepts, but not necessarily in a particular language that I have decided. So excellent communication skills and that on the CV, usually end up creating a big disconnect when I'm meeting, especially when I'm meeting people who are not coming from mainstream backgrounds or cities that are not tier one, tier two. This becomes the most major disconnect. So not useless, but definitely disconnected.
So, like coming to the first point that you mentioned that no skill is useless. So, should a person write all the skills they have? Like, for example, for example, I like music. Should they mention those things in a resume when like does that offer anything of insight to a recruiter who's looking at it?
I think it depends on the section in your CV. Honestly, if you're joining, for example, if I were working in the entertainment and media space, then your creative pursuits are not just a recreational habit, but really a skill as well. And maybe, you're going to get hired for that more than anything else. And I have hired people who were in hardcore extremely different FMCG sales background in the music industry when I did, for the fact that they had music as interest which they were pursuing and building a skill on, but more as a hobby at that point. So like I said, there's no useless skill. It's just about the relevance and the context of it. So I think what is more important is understanding what, or at least being able to anticipate what you're applying for. What does that need as a skill, and being able to be more specific about it in what you write on your resume. While there will be some things which you must put out even if it's not relevant for that industry, but you've built it as a skill perhaps and could be relevant, you never know, in some other role in some other place.
Okay, all right. On that note, the next one, like what interview question do you find the most overrated?
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Never asked it, don't like it, I don't like answering it as well.
All right. The next one, like what's the biggest interview red flag that you've encountered when you seen a candidate?
I think, there is this fallacy that a lot of, maybe I'm not even speaking of candidates with a certain section, be it a fresher, be it in, placement interviews versus lateral interviews. There is that one section of candidates that think that being an over smart response responder to an interview question would cut it. No, it doesn't. Honestly, I think at the same time, we're not saying that you have to be fake or inauthentic, and don't be fakely polite or something. But I think a major red flag is when instead of a question and answer, because there are very clear roles defined in an interview. An interview is sitting, you are an interviewee, and that is how the question and answer has to go. So when it starts to become more of a rhetoric and a challenge and a kind of sparring where it feels like I'm trying to say I'm too smart for this, or I'm a maverick. I think you should let that happen through the way that you work and you pitch your work and what you've done, than do that with your persona or your way of responding. So it's a major red flag, and most interviewers would say that. I think we don't prefer that.
So on that note, do you think confidence in an interview is overrated?
See, there's a big difference, and also at the same time, a very thin line between confidence and overconfidence.
Yeah.
The difference is vast. The line is very thin. I say that because it's literally about the small things that you do. Very small things like the body language, the way, like I said, in terms of how are you asking and answering questions. What is the way in which you are portraying your curiosity versus your skepticism about a particular role or a particular culture or industry or financials? These are good questions. It's good to have intelligent questions coming from candidates. It's good to have answers that are like that. But like I said, it's the finer, softer skills. So confidence, yes, you need confident candidates. It's not overrated at all. It's something that, like I said, when I go back to the first question that I answered for you, I really wanted to help the candidate build his confidence, so that he doesn't have to kind of pretend to know a certain thing that he feels he needs to portray. I think your authenticity is what you should be confident about, uh, and not bring overconfidence into the space, because I think that's where you start to come across as a red flag.
So, like, the reason I ask this is because, let's say I don't feel confident going to an interview. Should
Hmm.
I fake that confidence?
You have to fake it a little bit. We all do, to be honest. But yeah, like I said, don't fake it to the point where you're not in touch with your own self. I think it's organizations and interviewers and recruiters are also becoming a lot more evolved and less mechanical. When I speak of more than 2 decades back, or 2 decades back, I would say, when we were seeing that world, we were very scared and we used to feel lack of confidence, even though we knew we are not that bad. We can make it at least with communications, if nothing else. But we were very scared because there was a mechanical way in which the question answer would go. Today, I think there is a lot more expression. There is a lot more space to say, hey, I'm feeling a little nervous. Can I have a glass of water? If you can give me 2 minutes. And these are good habits to cultivate as a candidate as well.
Okay, so on that note, the another question, rapid fire. Have you ever had a strong candidate bomb a simple question?
Yes,
What's that interview?
unfortunately. I think, of course, I can't reveal which company, but we had a very strong candidate for a managerial role. And honestly, the way the interview was going, until I would say 60% of the interview, it was pretty sure we were already in the space that we would be hiring this person. And then it just got like very wrong in the last part of it, because when we asked the candidate to say, what do you have as questions for us and what do you want to know from us, the question that we were asked was, are you the people who are going to be selecting me, considering my technical round is done? Um, and well, bombs and how.
Okay, it links to the earlier question, the interview red flag as well.
Yeah. And I think it was also about understanding that it was not just me. I mean, I'm talking about a panel that was sitting in front, and these were senior multifunctional panel that was sitting. So it just kind of showed us the thought process of the person that thought that having a technical interview and nailing that is enough. Which means that when you come into an organization, are you going to be so one dimensional that your prowess is only in that department and not with stakeholders? So it speaks volumes about your thought process.
And do you think, like, if the core thing that he wanted to ask was him, how could he have phrased that differently if that
Yes,
was the core
that's a
thing that
good
he wanted?
question. That's a good question, and in fact, we spoke about it quite a bit when that happened. Was could have just asked, saying, how is my work going to be correlating with each of you? I think it's a great question. Means the same thing, just in a very very different way. That how would I be working with each one of you, considering you're on the panel, or what happens next? Who would I be meeting next? Are there any other people that I would like to meet? Before, is there something you would like to tell me that I should know more of from your respective functions, considering I've already done my technical round? I think there are hundreds of other questions that could have gone way better.
Yeah. All right. So the last rapid fire question. So which is not like a really interview scenario, which is like a post interview sort of thing. So
Mhm.
what's the most surprising source of employee motivation that you've encountered? Like which is not the usual ones, the more surprising one.
So when you speak of employee motivation, I think, first, of course, trust, culture, everything that surrounds you in your workplace is very important. But uh, your colleagues uh, really make a difference. What you as share as a rapport, what you cultivate as relationship at work. While we of course have all these memes and jokes about how closely bonded a team is, and where a family can get very toxic as a term, but to be very honest, what really does contribute to candidates wow factor is also when they see joyful teams, and really kind of walk into a culture which doesn't look forced. And for an employee, to really stay back, sometimes all it takes is their bond and their comfort and their kind of camaraderie, and how each other, they push each other to do better. I've worked with such cultures. I know how it feels as an employee to be part of such places where my most strong and latent factor of motivation were actually the people I worked with.
Mhm. Yeah. So I said it was the last question, but I'll just had a follow up in this. So let's say for an employee to stay, do you think if you had to rank between the two, manager, like basically my relationship with my manager, or my relationship with my other teammates, like which are the same level as me?
I would say I would call it like a 60-40, because 60% weightage to the managerial rapport that you have, because we put a lot of emphasis on managerial roles in building culture, building team, building productivity, and building great habits, I would say, because you have to walk the talk as well, and you have to take care of a lot of things. So there's a lot of pressure, of course, on the manager here to do so. But the reason I say it as 60-40 is that managers also have there are so many different types. There are some who are purposefully perhaps not great, but there are also those who are trying to figure it out themselves, and we have to cut them some slack. While there are others who've probably nailed it, but you throw a different dynamic and perhaps they're not nailing it. So nobody's perfect, and at those times your team becomes a major anchor for you. Your team and your colleagues become like a major, sometimes what unites people is a difficult time or a difficult boss, because everyone's having the same experience, I would say. But that doesn't forgive, of course, a bad manager. So 60-40.
All right. So this brings us to the end of the rapid fire round. We'll move on to the next one. So in this one, I'll talk about like real sort of personas of people, and if they come to an interview, is that a yes or a no? Is it a hire or a pass?
Sure.
Okay. So the first one is so hire or pass someone who's passionate but slightly less skilled than like a lot of your applicant pool.
Mhm.
And I think it's probably like in gaming, right? Like for example, there are a lot of people who are passionate about gaming. uh, would you index on that passion?
Depends on the specific role here, because we do find a lot of passionate aspirants and applicants, but certain roles require a certain learning curve. And if we have the bandwidth to be able to provide that time and resource and mentoring to get the person to develop that learning curve, we do hire for passion, because passion lasts and keeps the person retained for a long time. Having said that, for certain roles where a specific technical qualification is a must, or having done a specific experience in the technical side, again, keep speaking of technical and creative sides, because practice is very important here. You can't only win on passion. But it is going to be only basis the urgency for filling in that role. Internally, there are always ways to skill up people who are passionate about that particular stream, but are working somewhere else. But when it's coming from outside, we need to measure time as well.
So just as a follow up to this as well, we just I think we'll break the pattern of the section. But so for a lot of people, like for example, let's take the example of gaming. So there
Mm.
are people who are passionate about gaming, but that's the end result that they're passionate towards. Like if they're coming in a specific function, there's a very specific role that they're going to do.
Mm.
Do you see that realization coming to people, and especially among freshers or like early stage people, wherein they realize that okay, this is not like exactly, this is like a normal day job. It's not really contributing to the passion that I
I
was
think,
passionate.
yeah, I mean, I think what happens is a lot of people, especially at the junior and younger levels, we're not expecting them to really be able to see their whole career path. I think it's wrong of us if we ask them, and that's why I said I don't like that 10 years from now question, because especially in such an evolving, dynamic space, how can you predict, your path really so quickly? So yes, we do have, and I think every industry we've seen that, where people have joined for the fact that it's a great brand, and I want to be part of this brand, and I want to do this, and I want to be part of this great breakthrough that we're doing. All the companies I've worked for, we've met people like that, and then we've also seen a few people who have suddenly realized that okay, I'm very far away from my immediate impact. So what I think I'm doing, I'm not able to understand if it's really the big picture that I thought of, or I'm feeling very distanced from the product directly. And here is where the retention tactics for an organization starts. I know we're talking about the hiring part here, but no hiring can succeed, like I said, without retention on the other side, right? So retention requires for companies to build that big picture perspective in teams, for them to understand the vision. And that's again the reason why I said that for the early hirers and the recruiters, it's important for you to build that bridge and educate people also about what are the careers and how do you get there, and what are the first few years going to look like. Because the more you do more of that, I think the better your candidate applications become, because at least the quotient will increase of people who are taking an informed approach in their career.
All right, we'll move on to the next higher pass, which is a serial entrepreneur. So someone who has started like multiple businesses, uh, but basically has not done like for some reason or the other has not succeeded sort of exceptionally. But So the thing is that they have worked in like small organization. They are used to a certain pace of work. Do you think that is sort of a thing that there is a red flag that okay, they may be more fit for an unstructured environment, more fast-paced environment versus a corporate sort of environment? And this can obviously depends on team, but like I'm talking about general organization.
Yeah, I think the general bias that does occur with looking at an entrepreneur's profile or a person who's worked in startups,
Yeah,
is that it's a job hopper and, will
yeah,
not stick. And I don't know, this person's probably just looking at opportunities and moving, or is not sure about what they want. I think
yeah,
that is definitely something that does come across as a deterrent, I have to be honest. But I personally have not rejected anybody ever on that basis. In fact, I've always tried to understand a little more, because, and in fact, I've hired some very good candidates who are still where they are, who came from such backgrounds or who were entrepreneurs themselves. And they've given good enough time of stability and then moved on if they needed to, or still stayed around. So I have hits and misses as examples of this hiring. But yes, I would personally consider to meet some of them if the work that I see on the profile, or what they've done, keeps evolving. So there has to be some kind of growth you need to see in that person's profile and journey. And if it seems like you're just going around in circles, it does confuse you. And like I said, if you don't have the patience and time to really go through every kind of application, then you've got to make some more obvious choices practically for the sake of
yeah.
business continuity. But sometimes, and especially in companies which do kind of don't bother about this part and
Yeah.
look more for the maverick quotient, it's
Yeah.
great to meet such people.
All right. The next one, hire or pass, the overly ambitious newcomer. So someone who is like extremely ambitious has and wants like a very rapid career progression. While that is like commendable, but like generally there's very realistic expectations around like how career development happens within your organization, right?
Yeah.
So one my question is, do companies make that exception? And I'm talking about generally, or do you see that over ambitiousness as a red flag, or is it a higher or is it a pass?
Definitely not a red flag, I would say, in terms of the expression of their ambition, because it's good to be ambitious as a candidate. If you don't come across as ambitious or having some kind of a vision for yourself, you couldn't be as impressive, because you would, like I said, some roles require stability, and therefore that doesn't mean lack of ambition. It just means a different kind of quality with regards to consistency and growth and perspective of knowledge. While some require fast movers, and over ambitiousness is great there. But I feel that it wouldn't be a binary like a hire or a pass here, because a large part of it comes across within the interview cycle itself as to whether the person's individual ambition is overriding or deviating from the organizational ambition. And in those cases, I think it's the dialogue in itself makes it very clear, or the candidate themselves become very clear about the fact that, okay, maybe it doesn't match. And the other way around as well. If a fast paced organization has someone who's medium paced in terms of their own ambition, then there's going to be definitely the organization choosing otherwise as well. It's all about my ambition marrying the journey and pace of what the organization or role's ambition will be.
Okay. All right. So the next one, higher or pass, silent achiever. So someone who's like did very well in the interviews,
Mm.
but remained very reserved, quiet. Like even if you ask like, do you have any questions for me? No questions. But did very well otherwise in the interview. Is that a higher or a pass?
Again, if it's a role which requires you to have a lot of customer interactions, you need to have maybe another second thought about it. Again, with patient companies, we are able to bring in another thinking panel and say, just let's do one more round of interview and be sure of our answer, yes or no. In lesser patient roles or interviews, we would have to say no to such a person irrespective. But again, like I said, if it's a role which doesn't need you to display a certain kind of extraversion introversion per se, doesn't really get defined by that quality, it doesn't matter. And honestly, while external candidates may be taking too much pressure about this, internally also we meet people like this, right? When they're going through career growth processes, you have quiet people who are silent workers, and then you are those who are different from them, and they can be very varied. Those people still grow and they do very well because of what they bring to the table. So you should never change your core, I would say. But I definitely want to talk about the part that you said that we did very well in the interview, was quiet otherwise, and didn't ask any questions. Specifically, as a candidate, if you don't ask any questions, it does put a bit of a spanner on your process, because I just feel that we need to know what you are thinking. I need to understand if you're interested or curious. So sometimes the question may not be about what is it that you want to know, but really about, are you interested in knowing about us? So a candidate asking me a question is less about the question, but more about the interest that the candidate has. And therefore, you must ask questions.
Okay. So should they manufacture questions?
I think they should have questions before. I mean, you should be prepared for the interview.
Okay.
And if you don't have questions, I mean, I would really be wondering, why aren't you curious about the role or about the company or about something? Either everything has been very well answered and you know everything, which is very weird, because we have questions sitting inside the company
Yeah.
sometimes, so, or that perhaps you've not understood it fully, and therefore your paradigm is kind of limited right now, is why you're finding it difficult. But even then you would have some generic questions, and I've seen people try and attempt that with
So
us.
like what I have seen is like for a lot of people, like the switch, like the mind switch is different. Like for example, right now I am proving to you that I am like I am fit for this.
Hmm.
It's only after you have made that decision that okay, yes, I am fit. Now I'll have questions. Like why should I ask questions prematurely?
I think it's also the way that an interview is structured, to be honest. You don't have to have a traditional setup of I ask questions first, then I ask you to ask. I could ask you to ask me questions first. And I do that quite a bit. I keep kind of, when I meet people, I'm not necessarily following a track or a structure which is traditional. I just go with the flow a little bit, but keep making sure that I'm hitting the points that I need to. But it has to be a little more organic, and I think it's very important, if a person's getting hired in a line role or a business role, for them to have some questions or some observations. So when you get asked a question of, do you have any questions for me, instead of saying no, you may just want to say, okay, what would be the top two things that you'd like to tell me, or what is it that I can expect in my first few months of being in the company, or what is your ideal candidate? 100 questions to ask. It's all about what do you want to know. You must want to know something about the job.
Are you looking for a job? You can 8x your chances of getting one by using Weekday. How 8x? By doubling the chances on three fronts: referrals, customizing your resume, and applying to double the jobs. Weekday can help you on all three fronts. Did you know that you can double your chances of getting a job by asking referrals? You can do that via Weekday by just one click, where people can give referrals to the existing companies via the Weekday platform. The second one is customizing your resume for every role. Did you know that 60% of the applicants of a job are never seen by a human recruiter? You can double your chances by customizing your resume based on every job posted. Well, it's not feasible to do that. You can do that via AI. So, Weekdays Chrome extension allows you to customize your resume for any job. The third front is applying to double the jobs. Imagine if there was an easy apply on every careers job posted everywhere. What we allow via front end automations is that you can just click once and no need to fill multiple long forms on every careers page. Give that information to us once and utilize it everywhere else. Okay, all right. I think that brings us to the end of the second section. We'll move on to the next one, which is where we talk more about your journey. So let's start with like what led you to sort of get into a career in HR, and what point did you decide that this was the field for me?
I think, I've answered this question at different stages of my career progression, and my answer seems to evolve each time because I retrospect harder.
Yeah.
I'm a student of sociology and anthropology from my graduation days. I've studied psychology, and I've always been interested in, understanding and working with cultures, social dynamics, human beings, what really happens behind the scenes, and why does it determine and how does it determine what happens on the face, really. So it's always been intriguing. I stumbled upon, to be honest, this field. I would not say that I was mentally prepared or that I was preparing for many years to get into HR. Honestly, I was building the plane as I fly it. When I joined graduation days, where there were people, when I was in first year, my college friend was preparing for CAT, which was supposed to happen 3 years later, but she was preparing since then, and I had no clue why,
Yeah.
what is CAT. But then I learned about it, and then I gave it myself. So my journey was very different and more unplanned, I would say. But like I said, I think for me it was a bit of a renaissance moment later.
Okay.
So I was figuring more out when I was in my first year and doing my internship, because that's when I learned the value of what I'm doing, how an organization runs. And I have also over the time realized that this is what actually is my way of learning. I need to understand the sense it needs to make, and that's when I'm able to do more, to be better at it or learn more. So I figured my career like that, and I got more strongly willed into being into HR. Thankfully, by the time I was ready to pass out, otherwise I would have been in a bit of a soup.
Like you've made like a bunch of switches, like very interesting set of companies. Like, so can you talk a little bit about what how those different domains are, like for example in the liquor industry, how exactly does like how exactly are people different from, for example, some company like Ubisoft? And I'm assuming, I don't know that, but I'm assuming people are more passionate towards gaming than liquor, but I don't know.
Honestly, I've seen passion in each of these sectors. I come from a manufacturing. My early days are in factory. I was in a factory HR role at the start of my career. I then moved to a corporate role in manufacturing, and from aluminium to steel to then moving on to products like Alcobev. I've seen passion in all these places, but yes, I think people are the same. And in fact, this is something that I've been asked also. In fact, when I've been moving to these different industries, one of the questions I've been asked is how will you take what you've done so far and use it in the next place? And I feel like um, your knowledge, your subject matter expertise is there, and you're building on it with different industries, so you're building more of adaptability and agility. But when it comes to people, no two people are going to be the same, irrespective, right? So irrespective of the industry, people are going to have their own nuances as human beings and individual unique people. And there will be people who are very passionate about that industry or product or their job in that space, and then there will be those who are here because that's a career for them, that's it. And I think it's good to be like clear about these things. So if I meet people and I understand someone's very passionate versus someone who's dispassionate but committed, versus someone who's probably just, it's a stepping stone for them, etc., that you'll meet all kinds of people in each industry.
What are the different domains that exist? What happens behind the scenes whenever someone has, like, for example, I'm talking about an applicant perspective,
Mhm.
someone
Mhm.
who's tried and applied to, let's say, a job posting. What happens behind the scenes to the point then they're hired, and then that life cycle management is.
Right. So I'll and teams would be very specific to what suits their architecture. But usually, a candidate's application goes through, and it could depend if it's a technical application versus, if it's directly going to the sourcing party or the recruiter. Because if there are cases where there are assessments to be done, etc., then, there are no filtrations that are done at that point. But really, most of the times candidates that are applying for such roles where there is a technical assignment are first made to go through that stage before there is any kind of filtration, just to bring more objectivity to the process. So you have to keep that balance. And like I said, every industry, every company will have their own number of rounds as well, specific. But usually after application there will be a screening round. That screening round will be, could be telephonic, could be in person. If it's a hiring drive, it could be in person in a mass setup, whereas it could be one-on-one, virtual or in person. Post the screening round, usually some companies directly move it to the technical interview round, while in some cases it first goes to an HR partner round before the business steps in. So it's a big difference again, and it varies from industry to industry, I would say. Where the technical round is there, you would usually have like a hiring manager directly, which would be the role's immediate manager, or it could be a bunch of people who are the experts in a panel who would be asking technical questions. If there has been a technical assessment done, that result plus the screening comments are already present with the business manager. And they are obviously taking a look at those answers and trying to then build their questions further. If it is going to the HR partner first before the business, then they would also be putting on a business hat and asking some questions which they could be familiar with, which the business needs. So they would not be trying to be the business, but really be a proxy for the business here, and also help the candidate be prepared in a way for the business round. Followed by, of course, depending on how seniority matters here in terms of the candidatures, it could reach the next level of hiring, which could be either a HOD or the super senior head of that particular vertical level. And depending again on the seniority, it could go through more layers of such interviews. But as the layer of interview increases, the technical part starts to merge with the behavioral part, merge with the soft skills, and more understanding of trying to understand more about the candidate's fitment into the culture starts to come in. What are the prospects, how do we understand and ascertain a person's headroom for growth starts to come. So that's how, when you move from very junior to senior roles, your interview rounds can increase, your interview questions will change, of course. And you're being asked questions, but it's not just the direct answer that is being looked at, but also what is being said between the lines, what your body language is saying, what you are saying, and how you are saying starts to matter much more.
So as you talk about, like, for example, we'll talk about just the first, like, top of the funnel, which is like resume.
Hmm.
uh, is the purpose of resume going through the first round, or the resume matters at every other stage as well? So for example, if someone is creating a resume, should they create it just for the purpose of clearing the first round?
No, I think your resume has to matter, because I'll tell you, when I see it from a perspective today, I meet only the candidates that have to be finalized, and usually it will be probably the top two. that I would be able to meet, and maybe the top three at the max. At that point in time, your profile and the composite of whatever it is, assessment, psychometrics, feedback from the previous stakeholders, etc., does matter. Your profile is important.
Mhm.
What
But
I'm
would
looking
you look
for,
at resume at that stage, like when you're looking at the
I
final
would read
stage?
it to familiarize myself, because you don't want to meet somebody without knowing anything about them and starting from scratch.
Mhm.
On
Yeah.
an interview, I think it really doesn't, even from a candidate experience, it's not a great experience, I would
But you
say.
would have like feedback from other people. Like, would that
Yes.
matter more than the resume because you're not really looking at resume and.
I'll speak of my personal perspective, and mostly where I've seen a lot of people who I have worked with, or know. It matters both ways. Your profile to bring in the objectivity. If I fall for everything that a person is saying about another, even if we are using the most objective ways to do it, behavioral events interview, competency based interview styles, psychomed, everything, it's ultimately the whole of all of this, and all of these things make for whatever I need to know about you. But I need to form my own opinions, and I need to have my own questions also, which I would like to base off of facts, which is on your CV. So it is important at every stage. What I do want to call out here, though, is which I see a lot happening, especially at the applying stages. People try to tailor their CV to match the JD, which I said again some time back, and that doesn't bode well for the candidate in the advanced stages, because you are going to get called out at some point, or you will be discovered for the gap that you may not, otherwise you should not have written about, but you've written as a proficiency or a skill or an experience, because you have to be worried about the fact that you could be asked a question to deep dive into that particular thing, which you may just have not, you could have just observed it on the bylanes and written it as a core team member. You should not do that in your CV just because the JD or the job posting is asking for it, because you will be asked about it at some stage. And even if you're not asked at the hiring stage, if you're onboarded and in the first few months you don't display that, you'll get found out, and it's not okay.
Okay, so on that note, like specifically, and you can talk about like different stages as well. Like, but what exactly are like evaluators looking for in a resume?
I think, if you speak from a business perspective, because evaluators would be two types. One would be the recruiter or the HR that is partnering with the business, and one would be the line manager, right? So the line manager, whose immediate requirement is a resource in their team, would probably be looking for the exact precise skills, experience, and expertise in that field, or something that can bring a new flavor if they need that. If the job requires room for innovation, or bringing in some kind of best practice or sophistication in a way, they would be looking for examples of that on your profile. Of course, if a job requires someone to be doing something which is a very, I would say, stable, not very volatile or dynamic role, then what they would also be looking for is someone who's got that stability and kind of consistency in their profiles. Um, Proficiency and skills would be important basis the technical requirements of the role, which a line manager would be looking for a lot more of. Industry sometimes, matters a lot for some people, while I personally, and again, here is where the HR comes in as, much as a surprise maybe for a lot of people, but actually as a people's champion, because we're the ones who are actually working behind the scenes with the business to help them understand that what are we hiring for. Are we hiring for qualification or the skill, certification or the knowledge? These are two very different, distinct things, and don't necessarily, need to be the same. So, how about we interview better, with better questions, or try to understand the candidate at a deeper level to really figure out if the person is making it or not, if a CV is looking 70% there. So that's where the HR comes in to play the devil's advocate, to be a balancer, to also reduce biases, which could be confirmation bias. If a line manager feels, oh, I have found somebody who was exactly like me back in my days, it's not good. Because while the chances of the candidate selection could be high, the chances of failure was also going to be equally high for the person in the company. So
Why is that?
I mean, you don't know whether there's objectivity, right? So you have to establish the objectivity, and that's where the HR has to come in and establish objectivity, saying what are you really favoring here, and is there a consistency in the feedback that the manager is giving for all the candidates they've interviewed.
Okay.
I can't have different, goalposts for different interviews for the same role. I need to have at least a few standard things to measure for everyone, and then say that okay, so and so made it and so didn't. But if so unconscious bias can creep in a lot, and that's where HR comes in to do a little bit of that proxy.
So let's say, like for example, like just this process, right? How much of a decision making in that interview process or setting up, like okay, these are the questions, are these standard questions or not? How much decision making does like the HR have within that, or like the line manager have within that?
In most evolved companies, and in most companies where the HR truly is a partner for business, they do it together. I think it's a riff off of each other. Some places the business manager would have the technical expertise and standards that they would be expecting, which could be important, while the HR or the recruitment members would be able to tell you the market picture, saying, is it really existing there as a combination or a skill in plenty? Or are we looking at something which is going to be super niche? Therefore, do we need to negotiate on how much time we are going to be taking? Or do you need to, maybe recalibrate some of your other goalposts to make way for access? Because at the end of the day, it is a partnership. It is not a client and service delivery relationship here. Gone are those days, actually. That's why I said evolved companies, evolved processes, they are partnering on a few questions which could be standard, a few ways in which they would be interviewing and measuring the same thing from two perspectives. If for example you're hiring for a role which is a managerial role, a people manager role, or a project manager role, for example, now here the technical and business manager will have a certain set of standards to maintain on what they need, or with regards to hitting the ground running on the professional front, on the business front, and could have a certain example of what I want to see in my people manager. But here comes the HR business partner who is able to align that in a more objective fashion, rather than making it look like very specific to one circumstance of management, or very specific to only one project. Because what you want is to build careers for people in the company also. So you can't hire only for here and now. Whereas a manager will always first think of hiring for here and now.
Yeah, it will be over indexed on what is the
Yeah.
current need.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So on that, like last question in this section, like, so what advice would you give for like early career recruiters and HR professionals? Like, what should they be doing if they want to become like you?
We need to communicate more and better with candidates. I feel like today we have a great leverage with different types of social media, various different places where there are candidates available and watching the space. So don't only go for traditional mediums to communicate, firstly. I think there are multiple different forums in which you could find latent talent. Secondly, don't go for traditional formats of selection as well. Try to infuse a little bit of innovation, automation where possible, so that you can simplify some of the parts, especially the parts where you are probably dealing with mass applications and you need to sift through quickly to find your core, or some kind of a group to work with the next rounds on. And I genuinely feel that being conscious of bringing in more inclusion and diversity in these processes, especially at early stage careers, is very important. Because as a company, if I have to maintain a certain diversity ratio, and I'm not speaking on gender, I'm just speaking in generally the general broader term of diversity, it won't happen magically in my funnel at a medium career stage. And early career stages and hiring at the lower levels are usually a great space for companies to leverage to bring in more people from various backgrounds, from various different communities, etc. So as early career or fresher hiring and campus hiring recruitments, you need to keep this kind of a marker in your mind, while of course staying unbiased in the process. But yes, social amplification, really need to work more on that. I feel sharing resources. Why only ask questions and ask for CVs, but what are we doing to educate and create access for candidates to apply and to know more? Interestingly, I just want to bring this back because I worked in my last this and the last two companies,
Yeah.
last three companies. The industries have been very different and nascent, or for the understanding of people. They've been around for more than 30, 40 years in the country, but people didn't know what kind of careers they can have in these companies. And I'm very happy that I worked in these companies because I was a part of making that awareness and that brand value come across to people and candidates. And I think that's where I've realized and seen that we don't communicate enough to candidates, and we only go in when there is a hiring drive to be done and to hire, and then we say, "Arey, our candidates nahi mil rahe." But I think we should communicate more, and we should use all these channels to create more brand propositions, to educate more people about the kinds of careers they can have, for example, in media, in gaming, in corporate functions, in support functions, in technical roles. If you have certain qualifications, what are the possible different ways in which you could experiment with your professional journeys? If we have certain knowledge of this market, we should be actually sharing that in the right forums.
Okay, all right. So just to like sort of deep dive into one of the things that you mentioned, for example, diversity, and you mentioned like not just gender, but like what are the other demographics that like diversity needs to be sort of more explored?
I think diversity, anyway, it's such a broad topic. Today, we are talking about so many things which are obvious to the eye, could be as differentiators, of course, but how you look, feel, act, where are you from, what culture and belief and faith you have, or what you identify with, but also neurodiversity, of course, and therefore making your process accessible enough or your jobs accessible enough for at least the ones that we can, and that the ones that are apparent for us to be able to. We can't probably nail everything in the first go. But also just building diversity with regards to your background, right? Educationally, where you come from, which institute or tier, your degreeing from, which tier of the city or state or demograph do you belong to. All these things form a diversity, and we as a country are so rich with that. I think it's a huge thing to tap into, and really, really be able to reach out and find talent. I've found some excellent people from in the creative roles, and from places where one wouldn't have imagined there were being offered such courses. So it's all about opening up your avenues as well. We ourselves as recruiters have to be very educated about the market, and candidates.
Things like, for example, yes, I think like cities or education background, I think these are like fairly, yes, you can understand that easily. For example, like faith or caste, any of
Mm.
these. So is there any sort of playbook or any way in which you can just be more aware around that and just actually actionable things that anyone an early stage recruiter could do?
I would say that this is a very top down thing, to be honest, because these are very sensitive topics. And usually, every corporate or professional organization should be staying away from creating an environment where this matters inside the company while it is acknowledged. There are two very different ways to treat it. Your policies, processes, and benefits should allow a person to feel acknowledged for their difference in everything that forms their identity, whereas your processes for making them enter the system cannot be differentiative or restrictive or over kind of over sympathetic either. It has to be merit based, but it has to have the access. I'll give you an example of how alcohol is a taboo, as in general for most different parts of the country, and for different reasons, I would say. It could just be various different things, but most important thing that kind of contributes to people not applying in these roles, and especially when I was seeing in the earlier days of the industry, women, quotients were lesser, was the ignorance or the lack of knowledge of what kinds of careers it has to offer, and exactly how does one have to make the cut here. And it became more about the challenges that were more apparent and how difficult it is to thrive and survive and perform, than actually how great it is and what your talent can bring to the place. But like I said, there is a responsibility of the company and the management to make sure that it is conducive. So if it's not safe and respectful as a workplace, then anything that a recruiter does will not survive.
All right, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So, one last question, which is one advice you would want to give to job applicants, which you have not said so far.
I'm trying to think of what have I not said so far. I think I gave a lot of yarn throughout this. Um, I say this a lot actually in a lot of other places that I'm either writing or present in different panels. But actually, two things I'd like to say. One is to stay authentic, which means don't fake it to a point where you're unable to really substantiate it. Fake your confidence a little bit if that is what boosts you, to get out of your house and appear for the interview, but don't fake information. That is a big put off. So be authentic. You will find the job that suits you, even if it's not the one that you applied for today. I think that is very important to normalize. We do have a lot of different desperations and reasons why we need something really bad, but we need to kind of understand that just because we've applied for something may not be the only one that would be meant for us. So need to keep trying, which brings me to the next one, saying learn from every experience of interview or interactions. Reflect a little bit on how it went. Even if you're not got an active feedback from the recruiter or HR, you've yourself gone through that experience. So spend a little time to see how could I do this better, what would I do more of, and what would I do less of in my next interview. Always think of it as there's going to be a next chance, just so that you can be better prepared, even if that chance is with another company, another time, another month.
So, like a follow up to that. So, for a lot of, like, for example, like if anyone is like applying to job, they are applying to a lot of companies. So it basically means that they're going to have, let's say, like the ratios might differ, but let's say
Mm,
90% or 99% are rejections,
yeah.
and only 1% which are like positive experiences. So is it practical to actually reflect on every of those negative experiences?
I don't think it is about the experience of negativity or positivity, but really what kind of questions I was asked and how I answered. Really reflecting on, in that moment, was I too rushed versus what did I say enough? If the next time I'm asked this question, how would I want to answer? So it's more qualitative, I would say, rather than, I think we need to remove the positivity, negativity judgments from our experiences, because we put pressure on ourselves. Nobody else is feeling that except for the candidate, and the candidate needs to feel better for the next one, no? So rather than reflecting on bura gaya ya acha gaya, you should be thinking of how would I answer this question again. Oh, you know what, I really like the way that I answered this, let me make a note of it, maybe I want to say the same thing the next time. You never know. Some things that you've observed, I think we need to, as candidates, be very observant also. You're walking into a company or you're sitting with a recruiter, also observe how they are interacting with you. It's very important to learn from people as well. You can't learn everything from books or from a trainer or from your own sources, but from people that you observe. So when I'm sitting across the table, I'm also seeing some things that I probably like, and I would really like to build that capability or skill or personality type in me, while I'm not trying to copy somebody, but I really like to pick up some good things from people. That's what evolution is. So I really do ask for people to do that, not just candidates. I just, I say this to everyone, that we're all each other's, we should be kind of learning from each other.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Kaushiki. This was great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and it was
Thank you for
great having
having
you.
me, Amit. Great questions. Loved it.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Are you struggling to hire talent? At Weekday, we have built a database of 80% of white collar workforce with their email, phone number, resume, and salary details. And you can send automated email plus WhatsApp plus call sequences to them. Yes, we call candidates on your behalf as well. Because India runs on WhatsApp and calls, we end up getting as high as 40% response rate. Gone are the days of sending a LinkedIn invite and waiting for days for someone to accept. Just use Weekday. Whether you are looking for a database to supercharge the productivity of your recruiters, or you're looking at a complete AI recruiter to do everything for you, we have a solution for you. Visit weekday.works to know more.